Hi, and welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, Parenting Insights from Pediatrician Moms. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank.
And I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. Welcome back.
Welcome back. We are going to tackle a parents under pressure topic about special education and children with learning disabilities.
This is going to be a high-level 20-minute or so primer in how to start thinking about special education for your child if and when you have concerns.
Great, let's jump in.
Welcome to the 10 Kids, 2 Docs podcast. Seasoned pediatricians and longtime friends, Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin have counseled thousands of parents and are raising 4 and 6 kids, respectively. Join these doctor moms as they incorporate fun and their combined wisdom and experience to share parenting insights for anyone looking for practical and trustworthy guidance. Please note that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
So I find in the office, you can tell me if you find this, Sylvia, the topic of concern about a need for special education, usually about learning disabilities, comes up. And I am trying to condense everything I want to say in a 2-minute blurb to get parents started on how to pursue that. So I think we're seeing a rise in these diagnoses as well, and also more parental awareness of what is out there and parents wanting to know how to ask the right questions and how to proceed.
Right. This is a part of the well child visit when we discuss schooling, what grade they're in, what services they need. And I will often engage in parental questions about this.
Yeah. Even though 20 minutes is so much more time than the couple of minutes that we have in the office to discuss this, it still feels like a very short amount of time to cover everything that we could in special education. So I kind of envision this being just a first pass primer, ABCs of special ed. As I think about how to structure this, I think the best way is to just kind of go chronologically from that point that you're starting to question if your child should be tested, all the way through to when you're having that meeting with the school to go over the testing and establish a plan for your child.
No, that sounds like a good format.
Okay. So to start off, this episode is going to involve a lot of acronyms. Have you noticed that?
Yes.
Special education is filled with acronyms. And the first one I want to point out is IDEA, IDEA. That's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That is what creates a structure for a child with a disability to receive special education and related services. Underneath IDEA, there are 14 different categories under which a child can qualify for special education: autism, deafness, visual impairment, developmental delay, intellectual disability, traumatic brain injury, and specific learning disability. Again, there's others as well. But just to give you an idea of what is covered under IDEA, you can fall into all of these different categories. As we go through this, I am going to specifically focus on the child with a specific learning disability and what that looks like, how that presents, and how you proceed through that. Because I think a lot of the other ones, they end up being diagnosed maybe earlier on or in different ways. Right.
Mhm.
So we have screening tools for autism very early on our well child checks. Parents, that's usually on their radar as their child is entering school. But
Right.
learning disabilities that present during school is a little bit more of an unknown for parents as far as to how to understand when and how to seek help. And the other reason I'm going to kind of proceed as if we're talking about learning disabilities is because of those 14 categories under this IDEA framework, 30% of children that receive special education services have a specific learning disability. So that's the
Really?
largest one by far. The
Mhm.
next one after that is speech impairment. Speech delay, speech therapy, that's a very common one that we see in the school system. That's at about 19%. Autism, to give you a perspective, is 13% of kids that fall under needing services through IDEA. So let's proceed as if you have a child that is at that early school age and you're starting to question learning disabilities. And I think here I'm going to diverge for a minute and just tell you a little bit of my story so you kind of understand the perspective that I'm coming
Sure.
from.
Sure.
So I have 2 children, as you know, that have been diagnosed with dyslexia, and they presented in very different ways. So I think this is kind of informative as to how to start thinking about if you have concern for your child with a learning disability. So one of my children, I had the advantage of homeschooling. I had been homeschooling for a decade. I had taught multiple of my children to read. And when this child was at pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, that like high time where children are learning to read, I knew that something was different. I mean,
Mhm.
it was just a different kind of struggle for this child. And the way I would describe it in simple terms was when we were phonetically sounding out words, what I would notice is that by the time we got to the end of the word and the last letter in the word, this child could not remember the first letter in the word. And we would have to go back and then phonetically do the words over and over again because it was like a inability to retain all of the letters in sequence, right?
Mhm.
Whereas this child had just demonstrated to me an intellectual ability well beyond that capability in other ways. This
Mm.
child is particularly gifted, just as a side, in spatial relations. So, one of my favorite toys of all comers is magnetiles. And
Mhm.
this child would build these amazing magnetile three-dimensional structures that were well beyond what my other children had built, that were just so creative and so interesting. And sure enough, I know that she's kind of gifted in that area. But in many areas of her academics, this learning to read was different for me. It was different than having taught my other children, and it was different than what I was seeing in her other schoolwork.
Yeah, like a mismatch maybe, right?
Yes, yes, there was like a mismatch there. And so I knew from my pediatric training and from the physicians that had been involved in her care that as a homeschooler, because I mentioned I was homeschooling at that time, I could go to my local public school and request learning disability testing.
Mhm.
And as a taxpayer, they will test her just like they would a student in their school. This is a
Mhm.
service that's provided by the government. So that's the first step is I do make a lot of people aware because there are a lot of private places that you can go to for specific learning disability testing.
Mhm.
And I think there are use cases where those can be adjunctive and helpful. But I think a lot of people, particularly homeschoolers, don't know that you have access to these resources through the public school as well.
Yeah.
So I went in with her towards the end of first grade for her and requested the testing. And so this gets to another point in this is that there are two ways that special education testing can be initiated. One is if a teacher has concern and the teacher requests testing.
Mhm.
Now, the school cannot test until the parent approves, but a teacher can be the one that initiates the concern and then present that to the parent, and the parent can decide whether or not they want testing. The second is if the parent has concern and then the parent can request testing.
Mm.
Even if the teacher doesn't show concern. Let me give you the example of my second child, again, just to kind of demonstrate the different ways these can present. So this child also was ultimately diagnosed with dyslexia. And when this child was in third grade, so had been on a fairly normal progression of learning to read and
Mhm.
had been doing well in first and second. And, I think of third grade in general as a point in a child's education where there's a big step in the expectations for writing.
Yes.
And what I was really seeing was like a disconnect where when what could be communicated to me verbally was very different than what could be logically put on paper.
Hmm.
And this child kind of more classically had exceptionally difficult to read handwriting. But there was like a difficulty in that getting the sentence structure and the sentence components and the stream of thought on paper that didn't match this ability to intake the information from reading.
Mhm.
My first child, incidentally, has gorgeous handwriting. So even with that diagnosis of dyslexia, has the most beautiful cursive handwriting of any of my children, I would say. So, there are these classic things that we think about in dyslexia, like reversing letters
Yeah.
or reversing parts of the word in your speech, or classically really difficulty learning to read. This other child that I had that was diagnosed with dyslexia had a more kind of standard progression in learning to read, but I was really concerned when I started seeing it come out in the writing. And sure enough, I requested through the school, they did the learning disability testing, and he did qualify for services as
Interesting.
specific learning disability compatible with dyslexia. So I tell those stories to illustrate the point, and I make this point to parents. There is no one thing that you can look at that says this child is going to have a learning disability.
Mhm.
Many, many children reverse letters or write them backwards for the first few years of elementary school. Many children are not confidently learning to read until the end of first grade or so. many children have very messy handwriting through elementary school. Like there's not any one thing we can say that's a definite sign of learning disability.
Interesting. Usually see where the teacher in the parent-teacher conference, they've seen their children in the academic setting, and they are concerned about a potential learning disorder or a need for special education or services. And at the parent-teacher conference, they bring it around to the parents, and the parents are blindsided.
Mhm.
They didn't know that there was any type of deficit or any type of concern. And as a pediatrician in that setting, I always counsel the parents to let them go ahead and do the testing, right? Because they need
Absolutely.
parental permission. Why wouldn't you
Yeah.
want the services if your child could qualify and benefit from them, right?
Yes. Yes. This is one of my main points. When I talk to parents, it's one of the main points I'd like to bring out in this episode. I am always an advocate for getting any services that your child qualifies for. I 100% agree. I think the teachers are by far the most trained. They see it all of the time. They also know, kind of like when I described with my homeschooling, I already kind of knew what a quote unquote normal progression was because I
Right.
had homeschooled so many already, right? Teachers are doing that times 30, every year, right? They see so many more kids coming through and they know. I respect their opinions very, very highly on this. I occasionally encounter parents who are very hesitant to proceed with testing, but the services that a diagnosis of learning disability opens up to you that your child is now rightfully entitled to by law is really incredible and often involves much smaller group time, whether it's in reading or math or whatever. And even that alone, I think, when you're in a classroom of 30, but you now get to do your reading group with a small group of 5 and a teacher who specializes only in teaching reading. I mean, why wouldn't you want that for your child?
Right.
So
Right.
so we've talked a little bit about the circumstances under which you might choose or decide to have your child evaluated for special education services. Let's transition in the second half to talking about what that evaluation looks like. So when a parent agrees to have a child evaluated or they ask for a child to be evaluated, it starts a clock. And this is a national mandate. Some states have rules that shorten this number, but nationally, the moment that evaluation is requested, the school has 60 days to complete the evaluation and then 30 days to schedule the meeting between teachers and parents where we all come together and discuss the evaluation.
Hmm.
I mentioned that time course just so that as we're having this discussion, everybody has in mind the amount of time that we're talking about. But the actual discussion of what services, what that meeting will look like, that's going to come in a later episode. Let me talk a little bit about the evaluation process. So, this is another amazing, I would say, feature of the way our public school system is structured, because these are really in-depth evaluations. So it all culminates in what's called an FIE. Here's our second acronym for this episode. An FIE is a full and individual evaluation. People will refer to, oh, we're having our meeting to discuss the FIE. And that usually involves a psychologist, it involves the teachers, it involves the parents, it involves interviews and observation with the student. It may involve a speech therapist. If there's other concern, it can involve an occupational therapist. And all of these people complete a list of different types of testing. So, for example, in testing for specific learning disabilities related to reading, there's going to be testing that looks at letter and word recognition, reading comprehension, reading composite, listening comprehension, spelling, written expression. Like, it's going to go through all of these different things related to reading. There will probably be, in some cases, a parent interview discussing what the parent sees, and a teacher interview. And then there'll be direct observation of the child in the classroom. And then there might be times where the child is pulled from the classroom and taken through a battery of testing. So all of this comes together to, at very least, give the parent a wealth of information
Hmm.
about their child's academic performance.
Hmm.
And in very general terms, to try to explain what you get back on an FIE, there's going to be all of these subcategories of things that were tested. In this scenario, we're talking about learning disabilities, which with relation to reading progression and comprehension and writing and math. And all of those are given a standard score that is on a scale where 100 is the average, and then one standard deviation, still considered average range, would be 15 points above or below. 85 to 115 is average. And I think for most people, sometimes the way I think about it in my mind is most people are familiar with this idea of IQ. And on an IQ, an intelligence quotient scale, 100 is average. So this is sort of the same parameters. We're looking to see how far a child is above or below average. This is very similar to what's done for gifted testing as well, above or below average in any of these areas. That being said, child has been identified as potentially having a learning disability. Special education testing has been done within that 60 days. I should say that that 60 and 30 days is during the school year.
Mhm.
So, if a request is made in May and the school is out for 3 months in the summer, then they pick up that countdown when school goes back. And then within that 30 days, the meeting to review the results is scheduled, and everybody's going to sit down together and review the FIE, the full and individual evaluations.
I just want to take a minute to highlight resources that parents might have. And I want to point parents to the American Academy of Pediatrics webpage, healthychildren.org. They have a very good guide for learning disabilities and differences, what parents need to know. And basically, this webpage talks about how children learn many skills in life, and some skills may be harder to learn than others. And if your child has had appropriate learning experiences and instructions, but is not able to keep up with peers, it's important to find out why and how to help. And the big thing I like about what they've highlighted is they say children who learn and think differently can succeed in school, work, and relationships. Often they can benefit from help that uses their strengths and targets any areas of need. So I feel like this whole article, as you read it and look at this resource, it really talks about children who just think differently. It has a good perspective to kind of reset parents to think there's no negative label associated with a learning disability. It's more just thinking about your child in a context of children who think and learn differently. It defines what a learning disability is, and it kind of talks a little bit about what can cause learning difficulties, but highlights how a lot of times they don't know. It goes through a little bit of a narrative on how do you know if your child has learning differences and difficulties, if you're suspicious, and it goes through a checklist. And I do want to highlight a shout out to primary care, because this is what we do in the well visit. Every well visit, you should be having some sort of developmental screen where you fill out a survey or answer a series of questions that your doctor is asking you. And sometimes when they're showing difficulties or some delay in development, this could be an early sign that there may be issues that might need to be addressed. And one of the things I really want to point out that they say on this webpage is to be wary of people and groups who claim to have simple answers or solutions. You may hear about eye exercises, body movements, special diets, vitamins, and nutritional supplements that might cure your child's learning disability. And to really reiterate, there's no good evidence that any of these things work. And if you're in doubt from whatever you see on the internet or whatever's marketed to you about learning disability, talk with your child's doctor about these things. Also contact trusted resources. This page actually points people to some of those resources. They talk about ways and a mindset that parents can have to help their children who may learn and think differently, specifically focusing on their strengths, helping to develop other skills like social and emotional skills, using resources and support groups, and planning for the future. So I highly recommend parents who are thinking that their child might have a learning disability or knowing that their child does, please check out this American Academy of Pediatrics page, healthychildren.org. I think it does a good job of setting a mindset, preparing parents for what's to come.
I like also on this, it will link you to many different articles related to other questions with learning disability, learning specific to teens, reading disorders, specific dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. We hear those terms quite a bit now, and what parents can do to help your child with a learning disability. So this is really a great resource, a great place to start. Puts in writing a lot of the stuff that we've already covered in this episode. And again, I'll go back to something I said in the beginning of the episode. There are many different diagnoses that allow a child to receive special education services under IDEA, that acronym that we talked about at the very beginning. We are highlighting learning disabilities because that is the most common diagnosis that causes a child to receive special education services. But I hope that in other episodes, we can explore all of those diagnoses as we go through them.
Yeah. So I'm going to put a link to this webpage into the show notes so parents can find it easily.
Sounds great, Sylvia. Join us next time when we'll go more in depth and talking about what does that appointment look like, reviewing the FIE, the full and individualized evaluation, and what services can special education provide. This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I am Dr. Vivian Carlin.
And I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.